as exemplar models. Now, turning to my cultural studies, my dissertation work applied the Annals paradigm that I've just explained to the Westos, who were an enigmatic native group who, after being forced from their homeland on the southern shores of Lake Erie, played an important role in the early South. They armed with flintlock guns, which they used to capture other Indians, whom they then sold as slaves to Europeans. They created quite an upheaval in the region, and they had a profound effect on the development of the historic Indian confederacies, which we know more about. We think about Southern Indians, we think about Creek Indians, the Cherokee, Chickasaw, Choctaw. These are all amalgamations of people who, based on language and cultural similarities, group themselves together in an attempt to protect themselves from these slavers. So the slave trade kind of creates a mechanism for this new ethnogenesis, and so by studying the slave trade, we're trying to unlock some of this early cultural, social, political development. Here we see slave cords, which every native warrior carried. These were to bind captives, and they are exquisite pieces of art, on top of being very, very intimidating tools. But they're exquisite. And we have a handful of these in various museums around the country, and I thought I'd show a couple here. Now, the use of the Bradellian approach shed considerable light on the Westos, and they were previously very poorly understood. What I did was I expanded the scope of the research that had been done on them to try to include all of Eastern North America, because the dynamics that created them existed beyond the South, where they played their major role. So by including all of Eastern North America, by including the 3 distinct European colonizing strategies, and a whole host of social, political, and economic events and forces that on the surface had no connection to the South at all, I was able to place the Westos and their actions within a broader explanatory framework, a framework that deepened our understanding of both. My book on the Westos, published by the University of Alabama Press in 2005, was nominated for a number of awards, including the Southern Anthropological Society's James Mooney Award, the American Historical Association's Award for Atlantic History, and the Gulf South Historical Association's Annual Book Award. It is widely cited, and it is considered to be the definitive work on this group of people. Now, my work on the Westos was aided considerably by the publication of 2 very important works in 2002. This was the year before I received my PhD. The authors of these 2 books I've since had the pleasure to meet and to work closely with. On the one hand, we have Alan Galay's book. He's a historian at Ohio State University. His book, The Indian Slave Trade, The Rise of the English Empire in the American South, is there on your left. And then James Brooks, who is the director of the School of Advanced Research in Santa Fe. His book, Captives and Cousins, Slavery, Kinship, and Community in the Southwest Borderlands. Both of these books won multiple awards. And before they were released, the importance of the Indian slave trade in early America had essentially been lost to history. Now, since their publication, they've spawned dozens of conferences, dissertations, articles, books, edited volumes, and I've been lucky enough to participate in this growing subfield. I have contributed chapters to two of the edited volumes that have been produced. On your left, Tom Pluckin and Robbie Etheridge, Light on the Path, The Anthropology and History of the Southeastern Indians, which was published in 2006 by the University of Alabama Press. And here, Robbie Etheridge and Sherry Shuck Hall's edited volume, Mapping the Mississippian Shatter Zone, the Colonial Indian Slave Trade and Regional Instability in the American South, which was published by University of Nebraska Press in 2009. Now, throughout the course of my work on the Westos, I began to develop an analytical vocabulary that accurately designates, or I hope accurately designates, the various kinds of native polities that emerged in the context of colonialism. And one of those kinds of native polities was the commercial slavers, right? People who decided to embrace this idea of slaving others, in part because it gave them access to a number of European manufactured goods for which they desired greatly. My first paper on this subject was delivered at the British Museum and was later included in this book, Native American Adoption, Captivity, and Slavery in Changing Contexts, which was edited by Max Carochi and Stephanie Pratt, published by Palgrave Macmillan in 2012. One of the participants in this conference was James Brooks, the author of Captives and Cousins. And he, the conference was the first time that I'd met him. We got along quite well, and he recently asked me to participate in a seminar that the School of Advanced Research was holding in conjunction with the Clements Center for Southwest Studies at SMU University. And I was charged with producing a paper that examined the role of commercial Indian slaving in the development of colonial North America, to expand out and include not only the English-controlled Atlantic coast, but New France, French Louisiana, the Trans-Mississippi West, including Spanish Texas and New Mexico. So this slave trade created these same kinds of conditions, these same kinds of results across the continent. As the frontier spread, this slave trade spread with it, and the consequences. Here we have a picture of the group that was involved, including yours truly, and we're going to produce an edited volume. We've changed the title from Uniting the History of Slavery in North America's Borderlands. This was the name of the conference, but we're actually going to call the edited volume Linking the Histories of Slavery in North America and its Borderlands. All right. Rush, but I'm going to make it. Okay, sorry about the rush. Now, during this ongoing research, I plan to host a conference devoted to exploring in more depth particular commercial Indian slaving societies, and trying to compare and contrast them from region to region. And then of course the aim would be to produce an edited volume. And then finally, I have recently, and this is in part in response to the rise of the individual in historical and ethno-historical writing, but I have been experimenting with using an individual as a Brodelian lens. In other words, taking things down to the individual level and through the lens of this character, exploring these different levels of historical analysis. My first attempt at this was a piece that I did on Henry Woodward, who called Dr. Henry Woodward's Role in Early Carolina Indian Relations, which was published last year in this book. I could not get a good large image of this, but Creating and Contesting Carolina, Proprietary Era Histories, published by the University of South Carolina Press. This is really a practice round for what I consider to be a little bit more important work that my wife and I are currently collaborating on, and that is using the Brodelian approach to rescue Christian Pryber, who is an amazing historical figure, from obscurity, and reevaluate what kind of society he was attempting to develop among the Overhill Cherokee in the 1730s and 40s. This guy was a German intellectual. He came to the New World in the 1730s, went into the backcountry to the Overhill Cherokee, to Great Tellico. He got in with the headman there, Moytoy, married the man's niece. This is very important in southeastern Indian societies because they're matrilineal, so this would be like marrying someone's daughter in our own society. He was trying to create a utopian community there. He wanted men and women to be equal, which was much easier to do among the Cherokee than it was among the European societies that he came from. He also wanted to open the place up as an asylum for debtors, for escaped African slaves, for anyone who was rejecting the European society that he had come from. He also, 100 years before Tecumseh, was attempting to unite Indian nations as one unit against the encroachment of Euro-Americans. And of course the English and the French thought this guy was nuts. And they went up into the back country and they got him, they arrested him, took him down to Fort Frederica in Georgia, and he essentially rotted away in prison and died. But it's a fascinating look at the intersection of European, African, Native American belief systems, social systems, political systems, and Pryber becomes an excellent lens for taking a look at many of these aspects of early America. All right, getting close. I guess, we are drafting an article now entitled Lost Utopia or New Red Empire, Christian Pryber Revisited. And there's been very little work done on this gentleman. I think the most important paper on him was published in like 1917. And then there was a couple of works that were published in the 70s. So again, an obscure figure. I like to find the obscure figure and shed light. So this is what we do. Anyway, I'd be remiss if I did not acknowledge the influence that my students have had on the course of my research. I won't burden you with too much, but a couple of examples. When my guidebook was in the developmental stage, I taught a summer course in which myself and 16 students, along with a couple of graduate assistants, traveled 3,500 miles in 12 states. We visited virtually every site that is in my guidebook, and my purpose was to see these sites through the eyes of my students who knew not nearly what I knew, obviously, about these societies, because I want to see them interact at these mound sites, at these museums, and see what questions they had, what things turned them on, what things they were not interested in, and they really shaped the resulting guidebook, what was included, the organization of the book, and I certainly thank them in that book. And then a second example, I teach a course on the anthropology of piracy. It's one of my favorite classes, and one I think is truly anthropological in nature. But the idea was given to me by one of my students. He was a history student. He was taking my course on Southeastern Native peoples in the colonial era. And he came up to me after class one day, and he had been interested in Henry Morgan and the English and the French buccaneers of the Caribbean in the 17th century, which was the period that I was speaking about in class, and the period in which the Westos were most active as Indian slavers. And he asked me if there was a connection between those pirates and the Indian slave trade. And I said, I don't have any idea, but that sounds like a tremendously interesting thing to investigate. And 2 years of research later, I had a new course. So I pay a lot of attention to my students. I look forward to the possibility of working with students here at Oakland University. And don't worry, in the past decade, I've only lost one of them. So. How'd I do? Did I make it? Oh yeah, right about 30 minutes. Excellent. Well, I'd be happy to take any questions that you have. I know that was kind of a whirlwind tour, but I do have, I am a cultural anthropologist and an archaeologist, and so I have a very diverse research agenda. And in order to cover it all, I can talk a little faster than I'd like to teach it, talk in a class. But since you don't have to write down notes and be tested on this, I thought that'd be okay. So please, any questions you have?